We are letting folks in. I am very excited to see all of you. We'll get started. Good evening. Happy first night of Hanukkah. Welcome. I'm Erica Berry, and I'm the Executive Director of the Medical Society. I am so pleased that you've joined us for this unconventional happy hour and legislative briefing. This is the first time we've tried something like this, so thank you for bearing with us. If you've not done so already, please take advantage of the food and drink specials that we've put together with our friends at Beer Belly Deli or Anything But Beer. They've put together several food or drink options that are on the house, or rather on OCMS for member attendees. I have an order for vegan fondue and a cocktail in for later this evening, but you are able to put in your order anytime until Sunday. So thank you to all of our sponsors that made these specials possible. And thank you to Milmic for being our tech support and for hosting us this evening. We are going to ask that you mute yourself if not talking, but we hope that this is a casual, interactive session. So feel free to chat questions or to unmute to share them or just sort of to go back and forth. After this session ends, we will take a short break, but the awards and annual meeting portion with the rest of our guests will start promptly at 7 on this same link. So you can just hang tight here. So before we get started, I'd like you to humor me so we can do a little exercise in listening and following directions. If we can stop the screen share. Thank you to our wonderful sponsors. All right. I am going to, it's a great, if you see in the top right of your Zoom, you'll see a gallery view. So if you press gallery view, you'll get to see all of the people on the happy hour. And now I'm going to ask everyone to turn off your video. So press stop video on the bottom left. Do not leave, but press stop video off. All right. Look at, you guys are great directions followers. Brenda, you're jumping ahead of me.
Issue.
So if everyone has their video turned off, I'm going to cue you when to turn your video back on so that you will get a sense of who is in the room. So if you work for the Medical Society of the State of New York or the Onondaga County Medical Society, please turn your video back on. Wonderful. So these good folks are responsible for this event tonight, along with the many initiatives the Medical Society pursues each year. If you are a sponsor of this event, please turn on your camera. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your support. If you are a medical student, please turn on your camera. Oh, look at all these wonderful students taking time away from their studying. Yay, wonderful. Oh, I didn't even turn on my video. I'm not a good directions follower. If you are a current, past, or incoming officer or leader with the Medical Society, please turn on your camera. Wonderful. Thank you for your service. Now, if you are a practicing or retired physician, please turn on your camera. And you can keep your camera on, sorry, once you've turned it on. Wonderful. Thank you so much, physicians. You are the reason why we are here. Now, if you are related by blood, by marriage, or by employment to a physician, please turn on your camera. Thank you for all you do to support our physicians. And if you are a community member or anyone affiliated with our elected officials, please turn on your camera. Wonderful. Welcome. Thank you so much for your interest tonight. Well, thank you everyone for humoring me. Before I introduce our main presenter, who will sort of be giving us the meat of what we can dive into tonight, I'd like to introduce the President-elect of the Medical Society of the State of New York, Dr. Joseph Sellers to say a few words about the importance of MSSNY's advocacy work.
Thank you very much, Erica, and thank you for everybody, my friends from Syracuse and surrounding Onondaga County for inviting me here today. I'm Joe Sellers. I'm a internal medicine and pediatric physician. I work at Bassett Healthcare, not too far from you in Cooperstown. And I am the president-elect of our medical society. If God willing and the virus ends, I may actually become president in the spring. But Dr. Bonnie Litvak, our current president, asked me to bring her greetings to everybody today. I've been actively involved with MSSNY since I was one of the founders of the Young Physicians section, and as you can see, I'm no longer a young physician. But in all that time, I've never seen anybody bring as much energy to our leadership as Dr. Litvak. Just wonderful, wonderful leadership, and really important. It's sort of like the gods are looking out and saying who we needed to run our society during this most difficult year. But we have a wonderful staff in Albany and a wonderful staff in Long Island that are doing all sorts of work every day to support the physicians and the patients we care for. There's never been a more important time in the last 100 years since the last pandemic for us to stick together, support each other, and support our profession and support our patients. And I'm preaching to the choir here, but the best way to do that is through involvement in the Medical Society, State of New York, and your county medical society. I think it's, after you hear what Moe Auster, our Chief of Legislative Affairs and Chief Lobbyist in Albany, is going to tell us about all the great things we're doing to protect physicians, protect our patients. I think you're going to come away with even more enthusiasm for the county and the state medical society. And I just ask everybody, you got to carry that news, carry it to your colleagues. The only way we can continue our work is to get more members, to have more strength and more unity. And the only way we can do that is to have our sales force, which is the docs who have already joined, to talk to their friends and colleagues and convince them of it's always important to stick together, to advocate for our profession, to advocate for our patients, but never more so than during the health crisis we've had in 2020. So with that, I'll ask Moe Auster to take over and tell you some tell you about what we are doing in Albany and the work that is so important to carry out the directions we get from our county societies through our House of Delegates, advocacy that is requested by our physicians at the grassroots, and Moe is the one who translates it into action. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sellers, and thank you for all the great leadership you've provided in your many, many roles in MSSNY and your impending presidency. Erica, can I get my, I'm just going to share my screen now. Is it?
Yes, please. That's wonderful.
Okay.
And besides his official title of Senior VP of Government Relations, Moe Auster is also the man who's kind enough to take my calls when I am concerned about any systemic issues we're facing. So thank you, Moe, because those calls are more frequent this year.
I have you, and because you know my cell number, please also feel free to text me if I'm bumping up against the hour, and I know we kind of need me to move things along, because I do sometimes have a tendency to ramble a little bit when I start. I get so excited talking about these issues that sometimes I lose myself a little bit in it. But I appreciate you all taking the time. I'm glad, I guess I'm your entertainment for this happy hour. I'm not really as good as Billy Joel or Frank Sinatra or any other type of music. I probably gated myself for a lot of people in the audience by saying those names. But I really thank you very much all for taking the time. Again, the society is you. You are the ones who contribute your resources. You're the ones who contribute your time, but it's very important, not simply just kind of showing up for these types of events and paying your dues and all that. We also rely upon you to also carry out grassroots as well too, because so often what happens is I'm almost the orchestra conductor in Albany, but it really, there's a lot of work that goes out across the state, because the legislators are most familiar with you and want to be responsive to you, because ultimately they're the ones who look to you for votes, and they're the ones who you look to for care in your community. So that's why I want to keep you all informed as much as possible, because I find that that ultimately when they hear from you that, oh, in sufficient numbers, that tends to be when the best things happen. Just immediately turning to Washington, even though the necessarily say the legislature in Albany is done for the year, because there's still a possibility they could come back for the end of the year. The big action happening right now is down in DC. There is some possibility in the context of doing a budget resolution that they would also do a further stimulus package, a COVID relief package. And some of this you probably see in the news, but the important thing is a lot of things are potentially on the table that would impact positively, potentially some cases negatively on physicians, as we'll talk about. On the positive side, the stimulus package, there's some talk of expanding the healthcare provider pool that was done initially in the CARES Act earlier in the year. And there's also provisions as well under discussion in the stimulus package that would potentially help make sure that for those of you who received paycheck protection loans earlier in the year that would turn into grants, that those ultimately would not have negative tax treatment. There's been a little bit of concern about that. So there's efforts underway to try and address that tax treatment, because again, it's not just physicians, it's businesses all across the country that benefited from this program. Another big part of what they're talking about down in DC as well is additional money for state and local governments, particularly because we've faced such a huge, devastating impact from the pandemic. Obviously, from a personal standpoint of loss of life and health, and also the kind of the exhaustion of the healthcare provider community, but also, frankly, financially, the state of New York. In the context of this fiscal year that ends on March 31st, there is a $15 billion deficit. Over multiple years, it's $63 billion. The state is going to need funds in which to offset that gap. And a variety of things we're looking at. One of the things could be some potentially significant cuts to Medicaid payments, which I'll talk about in a little bit, or other areas that could get creative on tax areas. So one of the key components of the federal stimulus package is additional money for state governments to help offset these deep revenue gaps. Again, not enough to offset the overall budget gap that New York has, but it would help make a significant dent in that. Another area which we know has been a big thing. I know Erica had reached out to me maybe about a month ago, maybe about a month and a half ago, hearing from some physicians in Onondaga County about the impact of some pretty significant Medicare cuts that would take place under the 2021 Medicare payment rule. Now, it's interesting, that payment rule has significant upside. So if you are billing predominantly office-based services, E&M codes, it actually has potentially a lot of benefit here. But because of the increases on the E&M codes, it had to be revenue neutral. So the federal government, CMS, had to make some significant cuts as well too. So those who do more on the procedure side are going to get hit pretty significantly from that. So there's been a movement. MSSNY's been working very closely with a handful of other state medical societies, as well as the American Medical Association, in support of legislation that would prevent these cuts from going into effect. Again, there was a lot of members of our congressional delegation, including Representative Katko locally, signed on to a letter to the Speaker urging action gets taken. In the Senate side, our Senator Gillibrand also had sent a letter. You might have seen yesterday, Dr. Litvak put out a press release praising Senator Gillibrand for joining that letter. Now, whether they will be able to find the money to do this in the next week, again, that remains to be seen, but we've been doing a pretty significant grassroots push. This was the grassroots page that we've set up for physicians to send grassroots letters to their legislators. One other item that has been in the mix as well too, hopefully it's not going to come up at this point, are proposals to deal with surprise bills. New York enacted a pretty comprehensive version a couple of years ago that has become a model across the country for how to deal with emergency out-of-network and hospital surprise medical bills for out-of-network care. However, what Congress has been talking about is something that is not nearly as beneficial for physicians, more beneficial for insurance companies than New York said. New York really tried to strike an appropriate balance among insurance companies, among hospitals, and among physicians, and of course, among patients, to help make sure that no party was going to be advantaged by a resolution on this issue. However, the proposals before Congress, even though they would not overturn New York's law for the claims they regulate, it would create a very challenging precedent for ERISA claims, which we're very concerned. Our hope is that actually we're certainly in support of doing some type of action on a federal level to address surprise medical bills. However, we want to make sure that it's done in a way that's consistent with New York's law, because one of the key things that New York tried to do was to make sure that it was not going to in any way adversely impact on-call specialty care in hospitals, because certainly some specialists may have a choice of whether to go to an emergency room or not, participate in that way. And there's been, New York really wanted to make sure in enacting its law that you did not cause an adverse impact there. So we've been very, very active in discussions with our congressional delegation on making sure they do a fair law. And I'm not, again, there's been some discussions. I think it's going to get pushed off into next year. So one of the things I always say is nothing's over until they gavel out. So stay tuned for further details. Turning to the New York State Legislature, I'm just going to have a little sip of water. Even though ultimately the general parameters have kind of remained the same, an overwhelming majority in the Assembly, a Democratic majority in the Assembly, an overwhelming majority in the Senate, a couple new dynamics have happened. One is that there's about 45 new members of the New York State Legislature that are going to take place. They're going to take a seat in January. In Onondaga County, Assemblyman Barkley, Hunter, Magnarelli, Sturpey all won re-election. But Gary Finch retired, and there's a new Assemblyman, John Lamondes, who's going to represent kind of the southwestern Onondaga County area. In the state Senate, that's really where there's a kind of a nuanced difference that's going to take place. First of all, there's a new senator, Senator John Mannion, who's taking the place of Senator Antonacci, who had left earlier in the year. And then also Senator May won re-election. But additionally, and it was interesting, and this kind of follows the trends of what we saw in some other states on the elections as well, too, that initially on election night, people thought the Republicans had done very well, and they'd actually flipped several seats in areas across the state: Long Island, Hudson Valley, Rochester, Buffalo, even Onondaga County to some extent as well, too. But as it turned out, there were a lot of the absentee ballots were from Democrats, certainly in a much higher proportional number. And ultimately, when all the votes were counted, the Dems had actually flipped several seats that previously had been Republican. So what that means is the Dems will now have a veto-proof majority like the Dems have in the Assembly. And what that means, they can then override vetoes, because you need a 2/3 vote to override a veto from the governor. Now, as a practical effect, I don't think you're going to see a lot of vetoes being overridden, but there is a subtle negotiating aspect to this that will give the legislature more power in dealing with the governor in budget negotiations and dealing with the governor on legislation. So again, I do not expect to see very many bills being overridden or budget provisions being overridden, but there is likely to be a certain aspects in negotiation that can become sort of a bit of a trump card, that can be part of a negotiation where the legislature might use that to their advantage, or the governor might worry about that and therefore may approach an issue differently than they would be if there wasn't a veto provision. So just looking very briefly, I'm not going to talk too long about this, but just again, throughout 2020, we faced a number of different threats, and we really appreciate all the time that you all spent contacting your legislators on all of these issues. We generated thousands and thousands of grassroots contacts. And again, you have several, in Onondaga County, you have several members of the state legislature that are in the majorities, and as well as the Assembly Minority Leader, and who could be very, very helpful in helping to push back against bad provisions and advocate for good provisions. Just briefly highlighting it, we were able to defeat a very bad proposal that would have significantly reduced the due process that physicians have when a complaint has been filed against them with the OPMC. It would have given the governor, it would have given the health commissioner broad powers to publicize complaints against the physician for whom a complaint has been filed without any real criteria for why they would publish it. It would also would have given them much broader powers in which to execute a summary suspension, which means that they don't get any due process. It just means based upon the circumstance that they could pull the physician's license temporarily. As we were dealing with a pretty significant budget shortfall for this fiscal year, there was a proposal put forward that would have forced physicians to incur half the cost of the excess medical malpractice insurance program, which certainly for some physicians, the cost would actually have amounted to tens of thousands of dollars. So that was a real significant threat through negotiations on the budget. Thankfully, the legislature really stepped up big time to push back against these provisions. Certainly for patient-centered medical home, it's a very important program for a lot of primary care physicians across the state of New York. There were potentially cuts that were in the mix, but thankfully they were able, those were not continued. There were proposals that would have given nurse practitioners and pharmacists great powers to manage patient prescription drugs, technically given pharmacists prescribing powers. That would have been very dangerous for patient health were they allowed to go forward. And then, of course, there was legislation that's come up the last couple of years that would have legalized recreational marijuana. Now, we have in the past, we've supported efforts to decriminalize the sanctions because we know that treatment is the best option, but we have been very concerned with efforts to actually legalize the sale of recreational use. Now, there's a good chance that most or all these proposals will come up again in the next year state budget, next year state legislature, because that's the way things are. Oftentimes, the bills you're able to defeat, the win is temporary because it can come up again next year. So, look for that, and certainly on marijuana legalization, it is certainly more likely to occur because New Jersey just legalized it, which means we have several states bordering New York that have legalized marijuana. Again, this is just a poster that we used to help generate grassroots about the discipline proposal. Another key aspect of what MSSNY does is we coordinate a lot with outside groups, particularly the medical specialty societies, whom we meet regularly. And here is a letter that we joined on to the legislature outlining the strong concerns we had with that disciplinary proposal. Other important proposals on things we were able to achieve. We were able to achieve working together with the hospitals, and we thank the governor for advancing this proposal. Was a piece that provided liability protections for physicians and other healthcare providers, not only for treating patients with COVID or suspected COVID, but also for aspects of care that relating to responding to a COVID rule, such as the period of time when elective surgeries had to be postponed, and theoretically conditions could have worsened as a result of not being able to get the treatment that the physician believed was needed. Again, elective surgery doesn't mean cosmetic. It's just things doesn't have to be done immediately, but it does have to be done. So these protections were helpful in terms of helping to make sure that physicians were less likely to be sued if something negative were to happen down the road as a result of a physician not being able to provide the care that the physician need was necessary for the patient. There was a law enacted to prohibit the sale of flavored vaping products. And then it was also several targeted managed care reform provisions, including reducing from 30 to 15 days the time period for when an insurer has to make payment to a physician after the period of time if they've requested more information and that information has been provided to the physician. Importantly, DFS also created this administrative simplification work group to look at a litany of issues that to address issues raised by physicians and hospitals that interfere with care delivery. A couple of the key issues that have come up initially have been credentialing and prior authorization delays. We've had 2 meetings, including our second meeting yesterday, where we focused on credentialing hassles. And we've been working very closely with the New York MGMA to help provide us with sort of the kind of the in the weeds detail that we need, because frankly, as often is the case, there's representatives from the Health Plan Association, representatives from the Blue Cross Association, as well as representatives from several individual insurance companies like CDPHP, like Emblem. So, and they have lords of people who can just argue to the to the nth degree why their position, why their whatever their claim edit provision is actually something is necessary. So it's good to have practice managers in with us to help us out. Very briefly, scope issues. We have a litany of scope issues that we have to deal with every single year. Physician assistants wanting to do fluoroscopy, CRNAs wanting to practice independently, podiatrists wanting to treat up to the knee, optometrists wanting to do oral antibiotics. Nurse practitioner independence is definitely something that we're going to be dealing with next year. There is a law that there's a modified independent practice statute that nurse practitioners are able to, where they can practice independently, provided they have collaborative arrangements with physicians in the same specialty. That provision expires next year, but the nurse practitioners have had a bill introduced in the legislature that would not only continue that, it would also actually completely eliminate any requirements of collaboration with the physician, which is obviously extremely problematic. I think we've had a lot of concerns with even the modified independent practice, because we know patients want to see physicians, and if they don't want to see, and if they can't see a physician, they at least want to know that the nurse practitioner or the PA who's treating them has some connection to a physician. Well, this legislation would completely eliminate a connection to a physician. So we have received a grant from the AMA in which to do a number of things, including doing ads to educate the public about the concerns associated with no connection between a nurse practitioner and a physician. So that is, stay tuned for more details. That is something that we're going to be dealing with very shortly. Again, litany of practice mandates. I won't get into them because it's just going to take too long. I know I'm kind of like beginning to bump up against my time period here. I want to leave time for people to ask some questions. But again, every year there are dozens and dozens of bills that would actually require physicians to do all kinds of things within medical practice. So again, these are things we have to fight repeatedly. Now, a couple things did pass in the summer session, the legislature, which we were not supportive of, which we had some concerns with. I mentioned before the liability protections. There was a narrowing of that liability protection that was enacted into law effective August 3rd. There was some of you may have even followed this, there was obviously a lot of focus on deaths in nursing homes as a result of patients being transferred to nursing homes who still had COVID. There were a lot of families who were very, who were, again, I can't speak about all the individual circumstances, but there were a lot of families who, of course, were very upset over the loss of their loved ones, and basically also wanted to sue the nursing home. And again, this goes beyond for what MSSNY was involved in, the protections that we saw, the liability protections. So there was a big push to completely repeal those liability protections, despite the fact that what was being focused on was nothing relating to physician care. It was relating to the nursing homes. But there was great pressure on the legislature to completely eliminate the liability protections retroactively, going back all the way to the beginning of the pandemic, which would have been a disaster. So ultimately, and I think largely, the governor pushed back, Senate pushed back, and they reached a compromise where, as of August 3rd, the liability protections would not be continued for acts or omissions after August 3rd that are not related to COVID care. If you were treating a patient with COVID or suspected COVID, those liability protections continue, but not for non-COVID cases. And again, that's for acts or omissions after August 3rd. It was not retroactive. Also, there was a law enacted, the governor signed into law on October 7th that requires physicians to have signs in their office about how patients can find about their rights to be able to report to OPMC, despite the fact that we had thousands of physicians contacting legislators and the governor to oppose it. This is a tough bill to oppose. And let's just face it, our president, Dr. Litvak, who who Dr. Sellers mentioned before. It's been all over the news for the last several months, went on to a radio program. Actually, it's WCNY, Capitol Press Room. And the reporter just didn't understand why we, couldn't understand our concerns. Or I think and the challenge with it is ultimately there's always the objective of providing more information is usually believed to be more favorable in the public than not providing information, even if we were concerned about this causing distrust. So the good thing about this law, if there is a good thing, is that the way where it is placed in the law means that DOH doesn't have the ability to impose financial penalties for violation. The OPMC can take action against a physician for not having a sign up, but only if the not having the sign up was willful or grossly negligent. So it would be something that they would uncover if, say, they were investigating the physician for something else. They're not probably going to do an audit to see if physicians have the sign up or not, but it is something they could find if they were looking for something else. Again, recognizing that it's a one-time thing for physicians to put the sign up, we work with our general counsel to put together some language. Again, it's customizable, and really it's the second sentence here, which is the thing that the physician needs to have up. We wanted to soften it by adding the language about making sure patients receive appropriate medical care. I know I've seen a lot of different versions that folks have tried to say that we, that they want to add to it. Again, I would just ask you to contact your counsel to find out whether that is appropriate or not. What you really need is this link where patients can go, healthnewyork.gov, that brings you to the OPMC. Other big issues, very quickly, I mentioned before about the supermajority. There's probably a little higher likelihood that a single payer bill could advance in the New York State Legislature. The governor has been opposed to it. I think he supports the idea in theory, but is concerned about the cost. But again, the fact that you now have a supermajority in the state Senate, a veto-proof majority, and also you have a Democratic administration in Washington could make it a little more likely than previously. Telehealth, there were a lot of important waivers that were provided by DFS and DOH during the pandemic, including making sure it was provided without copays, making sure that you could use very basic technology and still provide telehealth. One area that they did not specifically address was payment, the payment making sure the payment is equal. So we are advocating for parity for in-office as well as telehealth. Again, this is just a listing of some of the key managed care reform bills we're going to be pushing this year. And again, and I think Dr. Sellers, we were talking beforehand, he wanted us to make sure we reiterate as well some of the numerous other activities that our government affairs office is involved in, but all of MSSNY is involved in to help benefit physicians across the state of New York. We've been in daily communication with the governor's office and DOH on COVID preparedness. We were recognizing that a lot of physicians have had issues getting PPE, or if they can get it, it's really expensive, or there's only small amounts of it. We are very excited about a deal we've entered into with a GPO to provide discounted PPE. We've created a peer assistance program, and I know this was
Mo,
an issue.
if folks are interested in becoming more involved, what's the best way for sort of them, either through the PAC Techs or Lobby Day, or what should folks do?
Be more involved with government affairs issues?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, first of all, you can plan to be in Albany on March 2nd, or not in Albany. You can plan to participate with us virtually on March 2nd. And if we were going to have our virtual lobby day, it's going to be, in many ways, it's going to be the same way that we've done it previously, except you're going to be able to do it at home. We hope to have a lot of the legislative leaders give a presentation in the morning, and then we hope on that same day you will have meetings with your legislators. We've also are trying to put together sort of a breakout rooms based upon the district of the state that you are in. And so we'd love to have you all be part of that after this meeting. We can make sure that you have the link for the registration for being part of the lobby day. But again, we have a litany of issues on our grassroots site. You can also be part of our PAL. And I will, from there, I will actually jump to our political action committee and give Dr. Sellers a moment to talk about that.
Thank you, Mo. And hopefully, maybe you can share the slides.
Dr. Sellers, are you muted?
Okay. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So, Mo, hopefully, if you could share your slides with the folks that are here tonight,
Yep.
because there's so much you went through very fast, and I know you only have a certain amount of allotted time. One of the things you went by fast was our peer-to-peer program. And I think it's one of the most important things MSSNY has done this year is to set up a program for physicians who are struggling, physicians who are being overwhelmed by just the difficult practice right now during the pandemic or during other times. We unfortunately have seen several physicians around the state take their own lives in acts of desperation, and we don't have any docs to waste. We don't have any spare parts here. We need each and every physician to help us if we're going to serve the public. And so hopefully our peer-to-peer assistance program is something anybody that needs some help or has a colleague that might need help, please call the number there, and we will get a trained physician peer to contact the physician in question, and we'll give support and resource and maybe just be a good listener for them and hear their troubles.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you highlighting that, Dr. Sellers, because I do think that is one of the most important things MSSNY has introduced. I think I'm gonna take a quick break shortly, so if you need to get a drink refill before the rest of the event starts at 7. And we'll start admitting people shortly, but I think, let's see if there's any questions in the chat. Looks like, does anyone have something they would like to ask Mo before we pause?
I love questions.
Yeah, hi, Dave Page. Probably my biggest question is, so back to the Medicare fee schedule, is there a proposed solution? Yeah, that
Yes.
it does support advantaging primary care, which obviously is probably one of the most important things we all need to accomplish if we're going to control healthcare costs in the future. I'm just kind of curious what the proposed solution is to keep everybody else from
Yeah,
bad.
there's a bill that's been sponsored by Dr. Ami Bera from California and Dr. Larry Bouchon from Indiana, bipartisan, that would essentially provide money to help allow the E&M changes to go forward while preventing those cuts from going into effect.
I mean, that would make sense and it would be fair. So
Yep. The issue's always they have to find ways in which to actually, budgetarily allow it. In some respects, it's almost like the old SGR scenario. Unfortunately, they've created this cliff for certain specialties. So that's one of the things that they're trying to hash out right now.
Thank you so much. Mo has been with the Medical Society for over 20 years, so he could dive into any of these issues and any of the sort of ins and outs of Albany goings on or DC for quite some time. But I really appreciate you taking your time out, to bring us all up to speed. It's been really helpful.
And also, please feel free to email me as well. I think I had at the beginning. I think I had my email address up at the beginning. Right, mauster@mssny.org. If you have any questions you want to ask me offline, I'm really happy to answer them, because I really, again, like I emphasized before, it's so important for physicians to have connections, and many of you do. Many of you I know regularly communicate with your legislators, but I really want to be able to help facilitate and make it easy for you. We do it obviously through grassroots letters, but the best communication is always through the phone or your own personal connections that you have with legislators.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Mo, and to everyone who joined. Thank you, Dr. Sellers. For those of you that have joined early and wondered what you've come into, this is the pre-event member ledge briefing. We will be starting just in a few minutes, and we'll be so take a chance to refresh your glass, and we'll start back up here in a couple minutes. Oh, I should mention the annual awards will start on the same link, so you do not need to leave. Welcome to all who are joining. Just letting a couple people more in, then we will start.
This is Frank. Now, Frank hit a tree with his bike and he's on his way to the ER. He's unconscious, but he'll be fine. His ER doctor will bring up his medical record and see his prior back surgery and medications he's allergic to. And when he heads in for surgery, sorry, Frank, they'll know everything they need to know. And Frank's primary care doctor? Well, he'll get a message letting him know Frank was texting and riding, and that he's going under the knife. This is healthcare done right, done with healthy connections. The information your healthcare team needs all in one place and tools to provide better care, so everyone's in the loop. And Frank? Well, he had the best shot at a quick recovery and avoided complications. At Healthy Connections, we're transforming the way our